We're going to red alert and firing phasers. That's right, it's Star Trek Ascendancy from Gale Force 9. In this 4X strategy game, you'll play as one of the great civilizations of the Star Trek universe, and over a series of rounds, explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, and blast each other out of the sky. A player will win after they've amassed enough culture to create 5 Ascendancy tokens, or if they've taken control of 2 other players' home systems. Now, it's worth noting that this is a revised rule set introduced in the Final Frontier edition of the game. If you have an older printing of Star Trek Ascendancy, an update pack will be available that replaces any outdated components. There are also many different ways to play the game, including the team-based Dominion War variant, playing with the Borg, or the all-new campaign mode, but we're just focusing on the base game here, so let's get started. Setup begins with civilization selection. There are a lot of civs, but we're gonna go with the classic 3. We've got the United Federation of Planets, the Klingon Empire, and the Romulan Star Empire. Each player selects a civ and takes the matching components, including a command console, which includes the civ's name, special rules, and tracks for upgrading their ship's weapons and shields. There's also an area for players to store the 3 main resources of the game: production, research, and culture. They also take a collection of 30 ships, 3 fleet markers and their associated cards, 10 command nodes, 3 starbase tokens, 1 Ascendancy token, and 15 advancement cards, one of which is the starting advancement, which begins face up, and the others will be shuffled into a face down draw deck. Within reach of everyone will also be a stack of system disks, space lanes, resource nodes, resources, and dice. In the general play area, each player sets their home system an equal distance apart from each other. This system begins the game fully developed, meaning it has a control node and one of each resource node. Players then develop their neighboring systems by rolling the space lane die, placing a lane of the corresponding size, and drawing a random system. If you draw a phenomenon, discard it and draw again. After placing a system, develop that as well, matching the resource nodes to what each system allows. If there are any gray spaces, players can choose which node to place there. Keep doing this until each player has developed 8 resource nodes. Then, each player connects one of these systems to the player on their right using a random space lane, and if necessary, unexplored systems, forming a link between all players. Finally, each player may place 3 ships amongst their systems. Randomly assign a first player and you are ready to start. That's how easy it is to build a universe. Gameplay occurs in rounds, each divided into 5 phases. Check victory, recharge, building, command, and maintenance. First up, players check victory to see if anyone has won the game. This probably won't happen in your first round, but as a reminder, a player wins if they control 3 home systems, including their own, or if they control their own home system and have 5 Ascendancy tokens. Next, everyone will recharge, which consists of 5 quick steps, though all but the second and third will be skipped on the first round. Pass the first player marker, generate commands up to your maximum, which is determined by your advancements and star bases, generate resources, 1 for each resource node a player controls, refresh cards, and resupply phenomena, placing a research token on any phenomenon that doesn't have one. After that is the build phase, where players simultaneously build ships, resource nodes, and colonies, and can gain an Ascendancy token. Ships cost 1 production each and can be built at a player's home system or any system they control with a star base. After building, if there are 3 ships in a system, players can commission a fleet, placing the ships onto one of their 3 fleet cards and placing the matching fleet marker where they were. Fleets have special abilities and will allow players to move multiple ships at once, but players can only support as many fleets as they have Ascendancy tokens. Players can also build resource nodes for one production plus the resource they produce, production, research, or culture. However, the system must have an available space for it and the ability to support the node, which is shown on the side of the planet. Players can colonize the system by spending one culture and a ship to place a control node on an undeveloped planet. And lastly, once per round, a player can spend 5 culture to ascend, gaining an Ascendancy token. Next up is the command phase, and this is where most of the game takes place. During the command phase, each player will take turns spending a command token or two by flipping them over and then taking an action. These actions include moving ships, researching advancements, initiating space battles, and a lot more that we'll get into shortly. Once each player has spent all their commands, they move on to the maintenance phase, which is when certain special rules will trigger, but most of the time you just skip it. Now let's talk about these actions. We'll start with the most peaceful stuff and end with the combat. So, first off is movement. This is definitely the most common action in the game. Ships can move in 2 ways, either at impulse or warp speed, and if multiple ships are grouped into a fleet, the entire fleet can move with a single action. Fleets can be commissioned during the build phase, but also during movement. If there are 3 ships in a system and the move starts or ends at your home system or one of your star bases, you can group them into a fleet. Now to move at impulse, simply spend a command token and move one ship or one fleet along a space lane to an adjacent system. But let's say you gotta get somewhere in a hurry. In that case, by spending 2 commands, players can move at warp. This lets them move across a number of systems equal to their warp speed. A player's warp speed is equal to the number of warp symbols on advancement cards. At the start of the game, that's 2 for most civs, and as players research new advancements, they'll get even faster. So that's all well and good, but we want to go to strange new worlds. Well, that's where exploration comes in. During movement, players can veer off the beaten space path and discover a new system. They have to have movement left to do this, and the system they're currently in must not have reached its space lane capacity. If all that's the case, roll the space lane die, place a matching lane, draw a random system, and move into it. If the system is a planet, also draw an exploration card. These cards will show that the world is beautiful and untouched, or horrible and scary, or maybe strange and exciting, or populated and bustling. Each card will describe what happens, if anything, so simply follow its instructions. If developing a warp-capable civilization, always place production nodes on gray slots, and if told to place fewer nodes than there are spaces, place production first, then research, then culture. Of course, there's more than just planets out there. If a player draws a phenomenon, place a research token on the system, then that player will need to make a hazard check. Just because this weird nebula is cool doesn't mean it's not also dangerous. All phenomena and some planetary systems are hazardous. Whenever a ship or fleet ends its movement on a hazardous system, for each ship that moved, roll a die. If that die is less than the hazard value and the system was a phenomenon, congratulations, you get a shiny new research token. If it's equal to or higher than the hazard though, that ship's destroyed. This can be modified, however. If a player has improved their shields, add their shield value to the hazard before rolling. When exploring a new planetary system, roll hazard dice before drawing the exploration card. If all ships are destroyed, place a card face down on the system. The next player to enter the system and survive the hazard will draw that card. The last thing players can do with movement is connect existing systems. Roll a space lane die as before, but instead of drawing a new system, place it between the current system and a neighboring one. They might not connect right away, but you can adjust them to fit. See, each non-home system that only connects to one other system is considered to be floating, which means you can rotate it as much as you like. Once it has at least 2 space lanes attached though, it becomes fixed and cannot move again. So that's all for movement, let's look at research next. As an action, players can research new advancements or improve their shields and weapons. To improve shields or weapons, pay the cost shown on the command console and push the tracker up 1 level. To research an advancement, draw 4 cards from the player's advancement deck and choose 1 to keep. Pay its cost in research and shuffle the rest back into the deck. Advancements always provide new abilities, and they may improve your warp speed, produce resources, and potentially give an extra command token. Next up, players can commission a starbase at any system they control. Starbases allow players to build new ships in that sector, and during the recharge phase will also grant an additional command token. Players can only commission as many starbases as they have Ascendancy though, up to a maximum of 3. Starbases are also too valuable to ever destroy, so wherever they go, that's where they'll be for the rest of the game, even if another player takes control of that system. If that happens, during the next recharge phase, that player will gain the extra command token instead. On the more peaceful side of things, players can exchange trade agreements. Each player has 3 trade agreement cards, and as an action, players can exchange agreements with each other. Once a player has another player's trade agreement, they'll gain the matching resources during the recharge phase. On top of that, while they aren't exactly allied, trade partners maintain an uneasy truce. This means they can choose to allow each other to move ships into and through their sectors and participate in battles together. But if they ever fight each other, the agreement is immediately revoked. Up next, a quick and easy action is to obtain resources. For 1 command, a player can gain 1 production, and for 2 commands, they can get a research. You can't turn commands into culture though, because art must blossom in its own time. It can't be rushed. So those are all the peaceful actions, but despite Star Trek's utopian ideals, they sure do get into a lot of space battles. So let's learn how combat works next. First, we need to pick a fight. This involves moving to the edge of the system and then spending another command token to attack. And the attacker can bring in any other ships or fleets that were already 1 system away as well. Combat takes place over a series of rounds until one side retreats or is destroyed. During a combat round, each player rolls a number of dice equal to the number of ships they have in the fight, plus 1 if they have a starbase there. Players normally hit on 5s or 6s, but this is modified by their weapons and their opponent's shields. Weapons make it easier to hit by lowering the number needed, whereas enemy shields raise that number by their value. Certain faction and fleet abilities may provide other modifications as well. Both sides attack simultaneously and then take casualties for each enemy hit. If this lowers the number of ships in a fleet to less than 3, the fleet immediately disbands and you place the remaining ships into that sector. After a combat round, each player, starting with the attacker, may retreat. If the attacker retreats, each ship will return to the system they came from. If the defender retreats, they'll move all their ships in the system along a space lane into a system with no enemy ships. If all space lanes are blocked or adjacent systems have enemy ships, the defender may not retreat. If neither side retreats, perform another round of combat. Similar to space battles, players can attack each other's systems. Well, most players can. The Federation are a bunch of goody-goodies who don't believe in planetary invasion, whatever. But for the cool civilizations, it works a lot like a space battle. The attacker rolls dice for each of their ships, while the defender rolls for each resource node, their control node, and their starbase if they have one. The defender counts hits as normal, but for the attacker, there are 3 possible outcomes. If the attacker rolls fewer hits than there are nodes, the defender will remove a resource node of their choice for each hit, after which the attacker can retreat or continue the invasion. If the attacker rolls exactly as many hits as there are nodes, the planet faces total annihilation and all nodes are destroyed, returning the planet to an undeveloped state. However, if the attacker rolls more hits than there are nodes, this is a total victory. Replace the control node with one of the attackers and leave the resource nodes as they were. Now, defenders can't retreat from planetary invasion, but if they don't want to risk losing those control nodes they worked so hard for, and they think they can take back the system, they can choose to surrender before a combat round, relinquishing control of the planet. Of course, if the attacker doesn't want to destroy critical infrastructure either, there's a different way to take control of a planet. Instead of invading, they can attempt to take it through cultural hegemony. This costs a command and up to 2 culture tokens, one to make the attempt and then the other if the attempt is successful. To attempt hegemony, the player rolls a die and adds 1 for each Ascendancy token they have. This is contested by the enemy's hegemony resistance, which is their Ascendancy, or their level in the case of a warp-capable civilization, plus 1 for each node on the planet. If the roll is higher than the resistance, the active player takes control of the system, just like on a successful invasion. As a reminder, at the start of a round, if a player controls 3 home systems or has 5 Ascendancy tokens, they win the game. And that's the basics of Star Trek Ascendancy. There's also a whole lot more when you account for all of the expansions and extra civilizations that have been added, as well as brand new stuff in the Final Frontier Edition. If you're interested in boldly going where no one has gone before, check out the Game Found campaign for more details. Thanks again to Gale Force 9 for sponsoring this video. I'm Becca Scott, this is Good Time Society, and you should like this video, obey the Prime Directive, and subscribe to the channel for more great games and good times. Bye-bye!